Hello and welcome back to Leadership Trailblazers. And today we're going to look at something which I talk about and work with my coaches again and again and again, and that's the perfectionism trap. Been working with a leader recently, delivers brilliantly, has a very, very strong reputation, but every report, every paper, everything that's going to be released into the world goes through 7 drafts, delayed decision making. It's at a cost of evenings, weekends. It exhausts them, it exhausts their team. Does that ever feel familiar to you? If it does, then the chances are you are caught in the perfectionism trap. Perfectionism looks like excellence on the outside, but from the inside, it's paralysing. I'm Lois Burton, executive coach, senior team coach with 25 years experience of working with senior leaders. So today we're going to look at that perfectionism trap, what it really is, and give you 3 tips to break free without dropping standards. So let's be clear. Perfectionism isn't about having high standards. Having high standards is good. You want to be able to do things really well. However, perfectionism is the enemy of doing great work. And I know that sounds counterintuitive, but it is true. Perfectionism says it must be perfect before it's safe. And that safety is the key here. Brené Brown is excellent on this. I don't know if people listen to her, but she's fantastic. And she talks about that the perfectionism isn't about the high standards. It's actually about protecting yourself from judgment, from criticism. You know, if I do it absolutely perfectly with no mistakes, nobody can judge me and nobody can criticize me. And in a previous episode, we talked about the amygdala. Well, we talked about it in several previous episodes. The amygdala being the part of our brain that scans for threat. And the amygdala is highly sensitive to criticism. And so what it says is, oh no, there could be a little tiny mistake in there. I've got to keep going with it. But it's false. And it's creating a false sense of safety. And leaders are particularly vulnerable to this. And one of the reasons is that the chances are that, you know, people rose in their career, got promotion, particularly in the early stages of their career, because they did have very, very high standards and delivered really, really good work. But now, as you start to lead at scale, that can become a liability. Because when you start to lead at scale, your job is not to produce the best report in the room. Your job is to make fast decisions and be able to enable others to give their outputs and to make them really, really good. I worked with an NHS director. Everything had to go through her. And her team stopped engaging. They stopped doing what they could do well because they thought it was pointless, because every time they did something, it had to go through her, and chances are she was going to alter it. And she was drowning, and they were disengaging. Because this is what happens. People either think there's no point because they're just going to alter it anyway, or they overthink it to hopefully meet the standards that they don't even know what they are because they're all in your head. This NHS leader that I was talking about, she realised that her old programme was, we can't afford mistakes in this world because it's not safe. Now, obviously, in the NHS, there has to be, you've got to be very mindful of safety. But actually, in her role now, this was an old programme. And this wasn't about making massive mistakes. It was about people just not wording things as she would word them. So it was way past its use by date, this old programme that had been running for 20 odd years, and she needed to re-script that in her own mind. And that's what we worked on through her coaching. So 3 tips on how to manage the perfectionism trap. Tip 1, the 80% rule. If it's 80% ready, accurate, fit for purpose, it goes. When you get to the last 20%, you're in the world of diminishing returns. And good and delivered beats perfect and delayed. So define what 80% looks like before you start, and then stop there. It will feel uncomfortable. Do it anyway. Notice what happens. I remember this from personal experience. When I was working with one of my coaches, Bernadette Doyle, and this is going back to 2012, and she always said, action beats perfection. And I held that in my mind, but it took a while to get me into that habit because it does feel uncomfortable. But notice what happens. I'll bet you the world won't end. Tip 2, separate standards from safety. Key question, am I doing more because it needs it or to feel safe? More drafts won't fix the anxiety, they'll feed it. So try the good enough test. Again, is it accurate? Is it clear? Does it do what it needs to do? If you can say yes to all of those, then it goes. Tip 3, delegate fully, not partially. Partial delegation is worse than no delegation. Agree the brief clearly and then genuinely step back. You might need to agree with them as well, what they need to do to ensure that you know that they're on track. But if somebody does something and it meets the brief, but it's slightly different from how you would have done it, let it go. Because your goal is a team that produces excellent work without needing you to fix it. Perfectionism is seductive. It looks like virtue and it feels like caring. However, taken too far, it's exhausting, it's debilitating, and it's damaging. So remember the 3 tips, the 80% rule, standards versus safety, and delegate fully, not partially. If this episode has resonated with you, then please come and find me at loisburtononline.com or on LinkedIn. This is Leadership Trailblazers, and remember, the way that we led yesterday won't lead us into tomorrow. Thank you.